The first time I saw Matriarch Kira, her magnificent tail caught the light of Zenthar Prime's 3 moons, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the crystalline walls of the diplomatic station. I was just there to fix a comms relay, not to change the course of interstellar politics with a casual compliment. "Nice tail," I said, my human mouth forming words that would unintentionally bind me to 7 days of ceremonial matrimony with one of the most powerful figures in the Galactic Alliance. I'm Joshua Reyes, a communications technician from Earth Colony 7. My life had been simple, predictable, and wonderfully invisible until that moment. Now, I've been given royal quarters, ceremonial robes, and the title of Consort Designate to the Matriarch of the Zenthari Dominion. And I have exactly 7 days to figure out what the hell I'm doing. The Matriarch acknowledges your initiation of the 7-day trial union. Her chief assistant had announced after my casual comment, the words echoing through the atrium with devastating formality. The compatibility assessment begins immediately. I remember standing there, toolkit still in hand, mouth agape as attendants swarmed around me, my security clearance badge suddenly glowing with a royal purple insignia. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. But the Zenthari don't believe in linguistic accidents. In their culture, every utterance carries intention, particularly compliments about evolutionary features. "Your words have been registered with the efficient," said another assistant, pointing to a hovering drone that apparently served as some sort of ceremonial witness. The recognition of the matriarch's emblematic tail as an attractive feature constitutes a formal proposition under Zenthari Courtship Protocol, Section 7.3. I tried to explain that humans often make offhand comments without diplomatic implications, but apparently, my cultural orientation briefing had skipped the "don't compliment tails unless you're ready for marriage" section. Now, as I sit in chambers larger than my entire apartment back home, dressed in ceremonial silks that probably cost more than my annual salary, I'm beginning to understand just how spectacularly I've upended my life with 3 casual words. Tomorrow, I'll attend my first diplomatic function as the matriarch's chosen consort. I, Joshua Reyes, who once hid in a supply closet to avoid making small talk at the company holiday party. The cosmos has a strange sense of humor. Somewhere, across the vastness of Zenthar Prime's royal quarters, Matriarch Kira is probably wondering what cosmic joke has tied her to a fumbling human technician for the next week. I wonder if her magnificent tail is twitching with annoyance or amusement. I suppose I'll find out soon enough. Consort Designate Reyes, your presence is requested for pre-ceremonial instruction in 1 standard hour. I glance at the shimmering notification hovering in the air and sigh, here we go. The comms relay I came to fix will just have to wait. The Zenthari concept of morning involves 3 separate awakening rituals, timed to the positions of the station's 3 artificial suns. I slept through 2 of them, much to the visible distress of the royal attendants. Consort Designate. You have missed the first light greeting and the mid-dawn acknowledgement, said an aide, whose name I couldn't pronounce without risking another accidental marriage proposal. The matriarch is already engaged in her 3rd diplomatic meeting of the day. I rubbed sleep from my eyes, trying to focus on the holographic schedule floating beside my bed. It's 05:30 station time. How long has she been up? The matriarch requires minimal rest cycles. She began today's duties at what humans would call 02:30. Great. Not only had I accidentally proposed to the most powerful Zenthari in the galaxy, but she was also apparently a morning person. This relationship was doomed from the start. The consort's greeting chamber has been prepared, continued the aide, gesturing to a door that definitely hadn't been there when I fell asleep. The architecture on Zenthar Prime was disturbingly fluid, rooms and passages appearing and disappearing according to royal whim. I stepped through into a circular room where attendants waited with various implements that looked alarmingly ceremonial. Please disrobe for the purification. The what now? Consort Designate Reyes. The ceremonial cleansing must be completed before you may join the matriarch in the Grand Assembly." I clutched my borrowed silken robe tighter. "Look, on Earth, we generally handle our own purification." The attendants exchanged glances that somehow managed to be both blank and judgmental. "The consort designate may self-purify if that is the human custom," said the lead attendant finally. "However, the sacred oils must still be applied by ceremonial hands." We compromised. I was allowed to shower alone, though the water was infused with something that made my skin tingle alarmingly. And I permitted the application of the sacred oils, which turned out to be dabs of iridescent liquid placed ceremonially on my forehead, throat, and wrists. By the time I was dressed in the formal attire they'd prepared, a bewildering arrangement of overlapping panels in shades of blue and silver that somehow managed to be simultaneously too tight and too loose, I was already exhausted. "The matriarch awaits," announced the lead attendant, and the far wall simply dissolved, revealing a grand corridor beyond. I stepped through, feeling like I was walking to my execution rather than to a diplomatic breakfast. The Grand Assembly turned out to be a massive crystalline chamber where light from the station's external solar collectors danced across surfaces in hypnotic patterns. Dozens of beings from across the galaxy stood in conversational clusters, their varied anatomies creating a living tapestry of interstellar diversity. And at the center of it all stood Matriarch Kira. Her tall, elegant form immediately recognizable, even among the exotic gathering. Her scale-like skin shimmered with iridescent blues and greens, and that infamous tail, the unwitting target of my compliment, curved gracefully behind her, its tip occasionally flicking in what I was beginning to recognize as a sign of focused attention. As I approached, conversations hushed. Aliens of species I couldn't even name turned to observe the human who had somehow caught the matriarch's interest. Kira turned, her large, faceted eyes settling on me with an inscrutable expression. "Consort designate Rays," she said, her voice a melodic trill that somehow carried perfect standard English overtones. "You have joined us at last." Was that sarcasm? It was hard to tell with the Xanthari, whose vocal inflections operated on a different spectrum than human ears were designed to detect. "Matriarch," I said, attempting a bow that I hoped wouldn't violate any obscure protocols. "I apologize for any delay. Humans require extended unconsciousness periods," she explained to the gathered diplomats, as if sharing an interesting scientific observation. "It is one of their more inefficient but endearing qualities." A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the assembly. "The consort designate will accompany me to the treaty renewal with the Galen Pact representatives," Kira announced, and without further acknowledgement of my presence, she turned and began moving toward a large doorway, her tail swaying in what I was desperately hoping was not irritation. I hurried after her, acutely aware of the many eyes, optical sensors, and sensory appendages following my progress. "Matriarch," I whispered once I'd caught up. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Joshua Rays," she said without breaking stride. "You have initiated the 7-day trial union. It is a great honor." "But I didn't know." "Your knowledge or lack thereof is irrelevant to the protocol," she said, her tail flicking once, sharply. The words were spoken. The officiant recorded them. The ceremony has begun. We entered a smaller chamber where several tall, willowy beings with pale blue skin and 4 arms each stood around a floating display table. The Galen, I presumed. "Matriarch Kira of the Xanthari Dominion," announced an automated voice from somewhere above. "And consort designate Joshua Rays of Earth Colony 7. The Galen representatives bowed in perfect unison, though I couldn't help noticing several sets of eyes widening at my introduction. "You honor us with the presence of your chosen companion," said one of the Gelen, 4 hands moving in an intricate gesture. "We had not heard of this union." "The trial has only just begun," replied Kira smoothly. "It is customary to include potential consorts in diplomatic functions to assess compatibility," "Of course," said the Galen representative, though the look they gave me suggested they found the whole situation as bewildering as I did. "Shall we proceed with the treaty renewal?" What followed was 3 hours of the most mind-numbingly technical diplomatic negotiations I had ever witnessed. The Gelen and Xanthari representatives debated the minutiae of transit regulations, resource-sharing protocols, and security measures along their shared borders, occasionally referencing historical precedents that predated Earth's first interstellar voyage. I stood silently beside Kira, trying to look like I belonged there, and not like a maintenance technician who had wandered into the wrong room. Occasionally, Kira would glance at me, those faceted eyes giving away nothing of her thoughts. About 2 hours in, I noticed a pattern in the data scrolling across the display table. The Gelen were proposing a complex routing system for their merchant vessels that, if I was reading the projections correctly, would increase their access to a particular sector by nearly 30%, while appearing to maintain the existing balance. It was the kind of pattern recognition that made me good at my job, spotting anomalies in communication systems that others missed. Before I could think better of it, I leaned toward Kira. "They're trying to increase their presence in the Aldebaran sector," I whispered. "The routing algorithm gives them a 27% advantage over the current arrangement." Kira's tail went perfectly still, a reaction I couldn't interpret but which sent a spike of panic through me. Had I just committed some terrible diplomatic faux pas? But then, she turned to the Gelen representative. "The proposed routing creates an imbalance in sectoral presence," she stated. "We will require a 27% reciprocal access increase to the Proxima territories." The Gelen representative's four hands momentarily froze in mid-gesture. "We do not calculate such an imbalance," they said carefully. "My consort's analysis indicates otherwise," said Kira, and I swear I detected a note of smugness. "He has considerable expertise in pattern recognition. The efficient will verify." The drone that had been hovering unobtrusively in the corner suddenly projected a complex mathematical model above the table, highlighting exactly the discrepancy I'd noticed. The Gelen representatives conferred among themselves in hushed tones. "We will adjust the proposal," conceded their leader finally. When the meeting concluded, an hour later, I could feel Kira's gaze on me as we exited the chamber. "You have unusual perceptive abilities for a communications technician," she said, once we were alone in the corridor. "I just noticed a pattern," I said uncomfortably. "My job involves finding irregularities in data transmission. It's not so different." Was all she said, but her tail had resumed its graceful swaying motion. "You will attend the diplomatic reception tonight. The Tyreek bloc representatives will be present. They are less straightforward than the Gelen." "Matriarch," I began, gathering my courage. "About this trial union situation?" "You wish to terminate it," she stated flatly. "Well, yes. I mean, it was an accident. I didn't understand." "The trial can only be terminated after 7 standard days," she said, her voice suddenly formal. "It is our most sacred tradition. To end it prematurely would cause grave offense not only to me, but to the entire Xanthari Dominion." I swallowed hard. "And after the 7 days?" "After the assessment period, either party may file for dissolution with no diplomatic consequences." Relief washed over me. "So after a week we can just go back to normal?" For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something like disappointment flicker across her alien features. "Indeed," she said, her tail now perfectly still. "We may return to our separate existences, as if the trial had never occurred." Why did that suddenly make me feel like I'd said something wrong? "I have duties to attend to," Kira announced abruptly. "My attendants will prepare you for tonight's reception." And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone in a corridor that seemed to shimmer with unspoken tension. 7 days. I just had to get through 7 days of this bizarre ceremonial marriage. And then I could go back to my comfortable anonymity, fixing comms relays and avoiding diplomatic incidents. So why did the thought suddenly feel less appealing than it had this morning? The diplomatic reception was held in what the Zenthari called the Arboretum, a vast chamber at the heart of Zenthar Prime, where gravity was manipulated to create a spherical garden. Trees, flowers, and plants from 100 worlds grew in all directions, their roots and branches intertwining in a three-dimensional tapestry of interstellar botany. Attendants had dressed me in a new outfit for the occasion, this one featuring what appeared to be ceremonial armor over the left shoulder and intricate embroidery depicting what I was told were the 37 virtues of companionship. I'd been briefed, very briefly, on proper etiquette for the evening. Stay close to the matriarch. Speak only when addressed directly. And under no circumstances was I to compliment anyone else's evolutionary features. I found Kira at the center of the spherical garden, where a kind of null gravity well allowed dignities to float gently up and down between different levels of the gathering. She was speaking with a group of beings I didn't recognize, short, stocky creatures with thick, ridged skin and multiple eye stalks. "Ah, my consort arrives," she said as I approached, extending a four-fingered hand in my direction. I took it awkwardly, and she pulled me smoothly into the null gravity well. My stomach lurched as I left the artificial gravity field, but Kira's grip was steady. "Representatives of the Tyreek block, may I present Consort Designate Joshua Rays of Earth?" she said formally. The beings bowed their eye stalks in my direction. "We are most intrigued by your selection, Matriarch," said one, its voice like gravel being crushed. "Humans are an unusual choice for one of your stature." There was something in the tone that set off warning bells in my mind. This wasn't just curiosity. There was a challenge here. "The Zenthari value diversity of perspective," replied Kira smoothly. "Humans bring unique insights to the galactic community." "Indeed," said the Tyreek representative. "Though some might question entrusting diplomatic secrets to a species so new to interstellar politics." I felt Kira's hand tighten slightly on mine. "My consort has already proven his value in this morning's negotiations with the Gelen Pact," she said, her tail moving in slow, deliberate patterns behind her. His pattern recognition abilities detected a subtle imbalance in their proposed routing algorithms. The Tyreek representatives swiveled their eye stalks toward me with renewed interest. "Is that so?" said their leader. "Perhaps humans have hidden depths after all." "Or perhaps they simply got lucky," said another. "One correct observation does not indicate diplomatic acumen." I felt a surge of indignation on behalf of my entire species. But before I could say something regrettable, Kira's tail brushed against my back in what I somehow knew was a warning. "Luck is merely pattern recognition that others have not yet discerned," she said. "The trial union allows us to explore such compatibilities without premature judgment." The conversation continued in this vein, superficially polite but underlaid with subtle barbs and challenges. I gradually became aware that the Tyreek block representatives were not simply questioning my presence. They were using it to undermine Kira herself. As the reception progressed, we moved from group to group, and I began to notice a pattern. Those aligned with Kira's policies greeted me with genuine curiosity. Those opposed to her viewed me as evidence of poor judgment. My accidental marriage had political implications I hadn't begun to consider. During a brief moment alone as Kira spoke with a Zenthari elder, I was approached by one of her assistants. "Consort Designate, I am Nexon," they said quietly. "I serve as the Matriarch's chief diplomatic advisor." "Nice to meet you," I said automatically. I acknowledge your introduction with appropriate respect." I was trying to avoid any more accidental proposals. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Nexon's features. "You should know that your trial union has created ripples in the diplomatic community. The Tyreek bloc in particular sees it as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" "To challenge the Matriarch's judgment and, by extension, her fitness to lead the Galactic Alliance negotiations." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Because she's temporarily married to a human? Because she appears to have chosen a mate impulsively, based on physical attraction rather than strategic advantage, clarified Nexon. The Tyreek bloc has long opposed the matriarch's progressive policies regarding integration of newer species into the alliance. They prefer the old ways, hierarchical, based on technological achievement and longevity of interstellar presence. But it wasn't her choice, I protested. I accidentally— The truth is irrelevant in matters of perception, said Nexon. What matters is how this situation is managed. They glanced toward Kira, who was now concluding her conversation with the elder. The matriarch has enemies who will use any perceived weakness against her. And I'm the weakness, I said glumly. Or you could be an unexpected strength, replied Nexon, their voice dropping even lower. If you prove to be more than they expect. Before I could ask what they meant, Kira had returned to my side, and Nexon had melted back into the crowd with practiced diplomatic invisibility. You appear troubled, consort, said Kira, studying my face with those faceted eyes. I just learned that our situation has political implications, I said carefully. The Tyreek bloc uses any excuse to undermine me, she finished. Yes. It is why I could not simply dismiss the trial when you initiated it, despite knowing it was likely a cultural misunderstanding. So this is all political theater? I asked, feeling oddly disappointed. Kira's tail moved in a complex pattern I couldn't interpret. The trial has ancient significance beyond politics, she said. But yes, in this context, it has become a test of my leadership, as well as a traditional compatibility assessment. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I've complicated your life with my thoughtless words. Perhaps, she said, her tail now still. Or perhaps you have simply accelerated an inevitable confrontation with the conservative factions. She turned her gaze to where the Tyreek representatives were now in deep conversation with delegates from several other species. They have long sought to limit Earth's role in the alliance. Your presence as my consort designate forces the issue into the open. I followed her gaze, seeing the diplomatic gathering with new eyes. What I had taken for a simple reception was actually a complex battlefield of alliances and oppositions, with Kira, and now me, at the center. What do you need me to do? I asked, surprising myself with the question. Kira turned those alien eyes on me, and for the first time, I saw clear surprise in them. You wish to assist in the diplomatic maneuvering? I'm already in the middle of it, apparently, I said. And I did cause this situation. The least I can do is try not to make it worse for you. For a long moment, she studied me, her tail moving in slow, thoughtful patterns. Very well, she said finally. Tomorrow, you will accompany me to the Alliance Security Council meeting. The Tyreek bloc will undoubtedly raise objections to your presence. We will use their predictability against them. How? A series of tiny illuminations rippled along her tail, the Zenthari equivalent of a smile. I realized with a start. You will continue to be unexpectedly valuable, Joshua Reyes, she said. Just as you were in the Galen negotiations. As the reception continued into the night, I found myself observing the interactions around me with new awareness. The diplomatic dance was intricate and dangerous, full of hidden meanings and ancient grudges. And somehow, I, a communications technician who had only wanted to fix a relay, had become a pivotal piece in a game I barely understood. But as I stood beside Kira, watching her navigate the treacherous waters of interstellar politics with grace and intelligence, I found myself wanting, for the first time, to be more than just the bumbling human who had accidentally proposed to her. I wanted to be worthy of standing at her side, even if it was only for 7 days. Day 3 of my accidental marriage began with another pre-dawn awakening by Zenthari attendants. Though this time, I managed to rouse myself for the second ritual, rather than the third. Progress, of a sort. As I was being prepared for the day, a process that had become marginally less mortifying now that I understood which parts I could insist on handling myself, Nexon appeared with what passed for breakfast among the Zenthari, a selection of nutrient-dense pastes arranged in geometrically perfect patterns. "The Security Council meeting will be challenging," they said without preamble. "Councillor Thurk of the Tyreek block has formally requested your exclusion on grounds of security clearance." I paused with a spoonful of blue paste halfway to my mouth. "Can they do that?" "They can request," said Nexon. "The matriarch has denied the request, citing the historical precedent of the trial union's diplomatic privileges. But it establishes their opposition for the record." I set down my spoon, appetite gone. "This is getting serious, isn't it?" Nexon's expression remained neutral. But their tail, smaller and less dramatic than Kira's, twitched in what I was beginning to recognize as the Zenthari equivalent of emphasis. "The Tyreek bloc has been gathering support for a more aggressive stance against further human integration into the alliance. Your sudden appearance as the matriarch's consort has accelerated their timeline." They studied me with unnerving intensity. They fear that a successful trial union between the matriarch and a human would symbolically elevate Earth's status. "But it's not a real marriage," I protested. "It's just a misunderstanding that we're playing out for tradition's sake." "Is it?" asked Nexon, their head tilting in a very un-Zenthari display of curiosity. "The matriarch could have found ways to minimize your presence, to keep you sequestered in private quarters until the 7 days passed. Instead, she has placed you prominently at her side in critical negotiations." I stared at them, unable to formulate a response. It was true that Kira had made no attempt to hide me away, despite the political complications my presence created. But surely that was just part of the traditional trial protocol. "The Security Council begins in 1 hour, said Nexon, apparently deciding I'd had enough revelations for breakfast. "The matriarch requests that you review these briefing materials before attending." They handed me a thin, crystalline tablet that lit up at my touch, displaying a dense array of information about the current security threats facing the Alliance, with particular emphasis on disputed territories along the borders of the Tyreek bloc's influence. "This is classified information," I said, scanning the contents with growing alarm. "I don't have clearance for this." "As consort designate, you temporarily share the matriarch's security access," said Nexon. "Another reason the Tyreek bloc objects to your presence. They left me to my breakfast paste and security briefings, both of which were difficult to digest. By the time I joined Kira in the transit chamber that would take us to the Security Council meeting, I had absorbed enough information to feel dangerously out of my depth, but not quite enough to feel comfortable participating in high-level security discussions." "You reviewed the materials?" Kira asked, as we entered the gravity tube that would transport us to the council chambers. "Yes, but I'm not sure how much help I'll be," I admitted. "Interstellar security policy isn't exactly covered in comms technician training." "I do not expect you to contribute to security policy," she said, her tail moving in that graceful, rhythmic pattern that I was beginning to find oddly mesmerizing. "I merely wish you to be informed enough to understand the deliberate misinformation that Councillor Thurk will attempt to introduce." "Misinformation? You think they'll lie to the Security Council?" "Not lie," she corrected. "Mislead. Present selective truths. It is a common tactic when direct falsehoods would be too easily detected." The gravity tube deposited us outside an imposing doorway where 2 Zenthari guards stood at attention, their ceremonial armor glinting in the artificial light. "Matriarch Kira of the Zenthari Dominion," announced an automated voice, "and Consort Designate Joshua Reyes of Earth Colony 7. The doors slid open to reveal a circular chamber where representatives from a dozen species sat around a table that appeared to be made of living, luminescent material. The center of the table contained a holographic display of the Alliance territories, certain sectors highlighted in pulsing red. All eyes turned to us as we entered, and I was acutely aware of the ripple of reactions, some curious, some dismissive, some openly hostile. Counselor Thurk of the Tyreek block was immediately identifiable by their position directly opposite the matriarch's seat, and by the ornate headpiece that housed their multiple eye stalks in a display of status. "Matriarch," they said, their gravelly voice carrying a note of challenge. "The Council notes your decision to include your temporary companion in these sensitive proceedings. The Council has been provided with the historical precedents for trial union privileges," replied Kira smoothly, taking her seat at the table. I followed suit, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "If there are no substantial objections beyond those already addressed, I suggest we proceed with the security briefing." Thurk's eye stalks quivered in barely contained frustration. "This modification of sacred tradition will be noted in the permanent records," they said finally, unable to find a stronger objection that wouldn't contradict their own previous reliance on the crystals. "As it should be," agreed Kira serenely. "Evolution of tradition through authentic intention is the foundation of lasting diplomacy." With that, she extended her hand to me once more, and together we descended from the platform and exited the ceremonial hall, leaving the council to their astonished discussions. The news spread through Zenthar Prime with remarkable speed. By the time we reached the royal quarters, attendants were already buzzing with barely suppressed excitement, their typically reserved demeanor cracking under the weight of this unprecedented development. "You've created quite a stir," observed Nexon, meeting us in the private reception area. "The diplomatic channels are overflowing with reactions from every corner of the alliance." "Positive or negative?" I asked. "Both," they replied, their tail moving in a pattern I now recognized as indicating complex analysis. "The progressive factions are hailing it as an enlightened evolution of tradition. The conservatives are predicting the collapse of Zenthari cultural identity. Most are simply intrigued." "Intrigued is good," said Kira. "It opens minds to new possibilities." "And the Tyreek block?" I asked. "Counselor Thurk has called for an emergency session of their leadership," said Nexon. "But they find themselves in a difficult position, having demanded the right of mutual intention and witnessed the crystal's affirmation. They cannot easily dismiss the legitimacy of your continued union." "A diplomatic checkmate," I said with a smile. "For now," cautioned Kira. "They will regroup and find new angles of attack. But we have gained time and legitimacy." "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly aware that we had successfully navigated the seventh day, but had made no specific plans beyond it. "Now," said Kira, her tail moving in that deliberate pattern of personal significance, "we begin the real work of discovering what this partnership might become, without the artificial pressure of traditional timelines." "I should probably fix that comms relay I came here for in the first place," I said with a laugh. "Before someone remembers, that's actually my job." The illuminations rippled along her tail in that now familiar Zenthari smile. "Your technical skills may indeed be useful, but I suspect your diplomatic value has eclipsed your original purpose here." Later that evening, when the formal discussions and reactions had been dealt with, Kira brought me back to the Harmony Garden. The living plants seemed to respond to our presence, turning toward us as we walked the winding paths to the central clearing. "There is one tradition of the seventh day that I would like to observe," she said, as we sat on the living wood bench. "Though with a modification, in keeping with our unconventional approach." "What tradition is that?" I asked. From a fold in her robes, she produced two slender bands of what appeared to be living crystal, similar to the harmony crystals, but formed into perfect circles. "On the seventh day, if binding is chosen, the participants exchange tokens of connection," she explained. "These would traditionally be ceremonial bands worn on the primary appendage." "Wedding rings," I translated, my heart suddenly beating faster. "Similar in concept. Yes," she acknowledged. "But these are not binding tokens. They are continuation tokens, a physical reminder of our choice to explore this connection beyond traditional boundaries. She held out one of the crystal bands. "If you are willing." I extended my hand, and she slipped the band onto my finger. It adjusted itself automatically, conforming perfectly to my human anatomy. Within the crystalline structure, tiny points of light began to pulse in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. "It responds to your life energy," she explained. "A sympathetic resonance that will strengthen over time if our connection does the same." I took the second band from her and carefully placed it on one of her 4 fingers. It too adjusted itself, and lights within it began to pulse in a rhythm that I somehow knew matched her own unique life rhythm. "Not a binding," I said, looking at our match tokens, "but a beginning." "A continued exploration," she agreed. Her tail moving in that pattern, I was still learning to fully understand. Something beyond diplomatic formality, beyond even friendship, into territory neither of us had mapped before. "I still don't know exactly what I started when I said nice tail," I admitted with a smile. "Nor do I," she replied, the illuminations rippling along her tail. "But I find myself increasingly grateful for your human propensity for spontaneous compliments." The garden keeper, an ancient Xanthari who tended the living plants with reverent care, observed our exchange from a respectful distance. Later, I would learn that in Xanthari tradition, witnesses to private ceremonies in the Harmony Garden were considered specially blessed, and that our unorthodox continuation token exchange would become part of the station's quiet folklore. As we sat together in the garden, the 3 moons of Xanthar Prime visible through the transparent dome above, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in just 7 days. From invisible technician to diplomatic partner, from cultural outsider to cultural bridge builder. All because I noticed a magnificent tail and couldn't help saying so out loud. Sometimes, the most profound journeys begin with the smallest steps, or in my case, with 3 little words that cross the vast divide between human and Xanthari understanding. Opening doors neither of us had known existed. I still had a comms relay to fix, but somehow, I thought that particular task might need to wait a while longer. There were, it seemed, more important connections to be established first. Stalks quivered with what I interpreted as barely suppressed frustration. But they didn't press the issue further. The meeting began with reports from various sectors of the Alliance, focusing on recent disturbances along the borders with non-aligned territories. Much of it aligned with the briefing I'd reviewed. But, as the discussion progressed to the situation near the Tyreek Block's home systems, I began to notice discrepancies. Councillor Thurk presented data showing increased human vessel activity near a disputed region, implying aggressive expansion. Earth colony vessels have increased their presence in the Cygnus Rift by 37% over the past standard quarter, they stated, as a holographic chart materialized above the table. This pattern of encroachment threatens stability in a region already subject to territorial disputes. I frowned, remembering different figures from my briefing. Without thinking, I leaned toward Kira. "That doesn't match the transit logs in the security brief," I whispered. "Those showed only a 12% increase. Mostly scientific research vessels responding to the anomaly detected in the rift last month." Kira's tail went perfectly still for a moment before she spoke. "The Council would benefit from reviewing the complete transit classification data," she said. "The increase noted by Councillor Thurk primarily represents scientific missions investigating the Cygnus anomaly, as documented in the Research Consortium's public records." Thurk's eye stalks swiveled toward me with unmistakable hostility. "We find it concerning that sensitive security information is being shared with a temporary consort who lacks proper vetting." "My consort has the appropriate temporary clearances," replied Kira, "and his observation is merely factual. The transit logs are available to all council members." One of the other representatives, a bioluminescent being whose species I couldn't identify, illuminated in patterns that the translator rendered as The distinction between military and scientific vessels is indeed important for our assessment. If the matriarch's consort has noticed a factual discrepancy, we should address it. The discussion shifted to a detailed analysis of vessel classifications, during which it became clear that Thurk had deliberately conflated categories to create the impression of human aggression. It was the kind of data manipulation I might have missed without the specific figures fresh in my mind from the morning's briefing. As the meeting continued, I found myself drawn into the complex web of information and misinformation being woven around the table. My background in communication systems gave me an unexpected advantage. I was trained to spot patterns and inconsistencies in data flow, to separate signal from noise. When Thurk later presented evidence of what they claimed was weapons technology being transported through Alliance space by human carriers, I recognized the spectral signatures from my own work. "Those aren't weapon signatures," I said, forgetting protocol in my surprise. "Those are frequency patterns from the new long-range communication arrays being installed at the outer colonies. I've worked on those systems myself." The council chamber went silent. All attention suddenly focused on me. "You claim expertise in identifying these signatures?" asked Thurk, their voice dripping with skepticism. "I'm a communications technician," I said, suddenly aware of how far out of my depth I was. "Those specific frequency patterns are part of the subspace relay system. They're designed to cut through the interference in the galactic rim. They're not weapons." Kira's tail moved in a quick, decisive pattern. "The efficient will verify consort designate Reyes' identification," she said. The drone that had been hovering unobtrusively at the edge of the chamber floated forward, scanning the holographic display and then projecting its own analysis alongside it. "Verification complete," announced the drone. "Signal patterns match Earth Colony Communication Protocol 793, designated for long-range subspace relay systems. Weapons pattern match, negative." Thurk's eye stalks quivered with what I was now certain was anger. "This proves nothing except that the human is familiar with his own species' technology. It proves that the data presented to this council was, at minimum, misinterpreted," said Kira, her voice carrying a new edge of authority. "At worst, deliberately mischaracterized." The meeting deteriorated from there into increasingly tense exchanges between Kira and Thurk, with other council members occasionally intervening. I remained silent, acutely aware that I had become the center of a diplomatic confrontation I hadn't sought and barely understood. When the council finally adjourned several hours later, Kira led me quickly from the chamber, her tail moving in sharp, agitated patterns. "That," she said once we were alone in the gravity tube, "was unexpected." "I'm sorry if I spoke out of turn," I began, but she cut me off with a gesture. "Your observations were precisely what was needed," she said. "Thurk did not anticipate that you would have both the technical knowledge to recognize their deception and the courage to speak it publicly." "It wasn't courage," I admitted. "It was just... I know those systems. I've spent years working with them. When he called them weapons, I couldn't not say something." Kira studied me with those faceted eyes. "Integrity is a rare quality in diplomatic circles, Joshua Reyes," she said finally. "Rarer still is the combination of integrity and insight." Coming from her, it felt like high praise indeed. "Councillor Thurk will not forgive this public correction," she continued, her tone turning serious. "They will likely escalate their opposition to our trial union." "Escalate how?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. "There are provisions in the trial protocol for formal objections to be raised," she said. "If sufficient support is gathered, the trial participants can be required to undergo the rite of mutual intention." "That sounds ominous." "It is a ceremonial verification of the sincerity of the trial," she explained. "A public ritual before the Alliance Council in which both participants must articulate their true intentions toward one another." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But our intention is, to get through the 7 days and then go our separate ways. That was the agreement. Yes, said Kira, her tail now completely still. That was the agreement. Something in her tone made me wonder if that agreement had changed, at least for her. But before I could ask, the gravity tube deposited us at our destination, and the moment for such questions passed. The remainder of the day was filled with more diplomatic functions, though none as confrontational as the Security Council meeting. Word of my identification of the communication arrays had apparently spread, and I found myself the object of curious attention from various Alliance representatives. By the time we returned to the royal quarters that evening, I was exhausted, but also exhilarated in a way I hadn't anticipated. For someone who had spent his career trying to be invisible, being at the center of interstellar politics was terrifying, but also, surprisingly, not entirely unpleasant. As attendance helped me out of the formal diplomatic attire, I found myself wondering what the remaining 4 days of our trial union would bring. And, more disturbingly, I found myself wondering what would happen when the 7 days ended. Would I really be content to return to my solitary life, fixing comms relays after experiencing the broader galaxy from Kira's side? The thought troubled me more than I cared to admit. On the morning of the 4th day, the political machinations of the Tyreek bloc became impossible to ignore. A formal petition has been filed with the Alliance Council, announced Nexon, as they entered my chambers without ceremony. Councillor Thurk has gathered the required number of representatives to demand the right of mutual intention. I looked up from the breakfast I'd been picking at, my appetite suddenly gone. Already? But Kira said they would need time to gather support. They have been more efficient than anticipated, said Nexon, their tail moving in sharp, worried patterns. The petition cites grave concerns regarding the authenticity of the trial union between matriarch Kira and the human technician Joshua Reyes. The human technician, I repeated, not missing the dismissive phrasing. Nice to know I've made such an impression. The language is deliberately belittling, agreed Nexon. They seek to frame the trial as either a manipulation on the matriarch's part or a presumptuous overreach on yours. I pushed aside my breakfast tray. When does this right of mutual intention take place? Tomorrow, said Nexon. The Council has granted the petition's request for urgency, citing the limited duration of the trial itself. And what exactly happens during this ritual? Nexon's expression grew solemn. The rite of mutual intention is one of our most sacred ceremonies. Both participants stand before the Alliance Council and state, in their own words, their true intentions toward one another. As they speak, the harmony crystals will resonate with the truth or dissonance of their statements. Wait, I said, alarm growing. Are you saying this is some kind of truth detector? Not precisely, said Nexon. The crystals do not detect lies so much as they resonate with authentic emotion and intention. They have been used in Zenthari ceremonies for millennia, their properties enhanced through generations of ritual attunement. But that's impossible, I protested. No technology can actually read intentions or emotions with that kind of accuracy. It is not technology as your species understands it, replied Nexon. The crystals exist at the intersection of what you might call science and what we know as soul resonance. Great. Not only was I caught in an accidental marriage with interstellar political implications, but now I had to undergo some kind of mystical lie detector test in front of the entire Alliance Council. What if the crystals show that our intentions aren't compatible? I asked, though I was more worried about what they might reveal about my own confused feelings than anything else. If the crystals show significant dissonance, the trial would be invalidated, said Nexon. While this would achieve your stated goal of ending the ceremonial union, it would also represent a significant loss of face for the matriarch, potentially undermining her authority in ongoing alliance negotiations. The weight of responsibility settled even more heavily on my shoulders. Where is Kira now? The matriarch is in emergency consultation with her advisors, said Nexon. She asked that I brief you on the situation and inform you that she will meet with you privately before the evening meal to discuss preparation for tomorrow's ceremony. After Nexon left, I spent the day in a state of anxious anticipation. Attempts to distract myself with technical manuals from my original repair mission failed miserably. How had fixing a simple comms relay turned into this diplomatic crisis? When Kira finally arrived at my chambers that evening, she dismissed the attendants with a sharp gesture of her tail. "We must speak privately," she said once we were alone. She looked different somehow, less the untouchable diplomatic figure and more vulnerable. Her tail moved in small, agitated patterns that I had come to recognize as signs of emotional turmoil. "I've heard about the right of mutual intention," I said. "It sounds like we're in trouble." "The ceremony itself is not the problem," she said, moving to the viewing portal that showed the vast expanse of space beyond Zenthar Prime. "It is what it represents, a direct challenge to my authority and judgment." "Because you're temporarily married to a human?" "Because I appear to have chosen a mate based on emotion rather than strategic advantage," she corrected, echoing what Nexon had told me days earlier. "The Tyreek bloc and their allies believe that allowing humans greater influence in the Alliance will upset the balance of power that has existed for centuries. My apparent choice of you symbolizes what they fear, that newer species might rise to positions of influence too quickly." "But it wasn't a choice," I pointed out. "It was a cultural misunderstanding." Kira turned to face me, those faceted eyes reflecting the starlight. "Was it?" The question hung in the air between us, charged with meanings I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "I mean," she said, her tail now perfectly still, "that while the initiation of the trial may have been accidental on your part, my acceptance of it was not." I stared at her, trying to process this revelation. "You knew I didn't understand what I was doing when I complimented your tail?" "I suspected," she acknowledged. "Human cultural briefings on Zenthari customs are notoriously incomplete, and your reaction when the trial was announced confirmed my suspicion." "Then why didn't you just, I don't know, laugh it off? Explain the misunderstanding?" "Because," she said, moving closer, "I was curious." "Curious about what?" "About you," she said simply. "About whether a human, particularly one who seemed so different from the diplomatic representatives I usually encounter, might bring a fresh perspective to the challenges I face." I felt oddly touched by her admission, even as I struggled to understand its implications. "So you went along with an accidental marriage proposal because you thought I might be useful?" "Not merely useful," she corrected. "Insightful, different, perhaps even compatible." There was that word again, compatible. The stated purpose of the trial union was to assess compatibility between potential mates. Had Kira actually been evaluating me as a genuine consort all this time? The thought was both terrifying and, I had to admit, not entirely unwelcome. "And?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "What have you concluded?" Her tail moved in a slow, deliberate pattern that I had never seen before. "I have concluded that the trial has been illuminating," she said. "More so than I anticipated." "Is that a good thing?" "It is a complicated thing," she replied, "but not unwelcome." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between us. "Tomorrow's ceremony," I said finally, returning to the immediate problem. "What exactly will be expected of me?" "You will be asked to speak your true intentions regarding our union," she said. "The crystals will resonate with the authenticity of your words. And if they don't resonate? If they detect that this whole thing was just a misunderstanding?" Kira's tail flicked once, sharply. "Then the trial would be invalidated, and the Tyreek bloc would claim a political victory, using it to further restrict human participation in alliance matters." "So I need to lie convincingly about wanting to be married to you?" I asked. the absurdity of the situation suddenly overwhelming. "No," she said firmly. "The crystals do not respond to falsehoods, no matter how convincing. They resonate only with genuine intention and emotion." "Then we're doomed," I said, throwing up my hands. "Because the truth is that this whole thing started with a misunderstanding, and we both know it. The beginning of a journey does not dictate its course. Joshua Rays," she said, using my full name in that formal way that somehow made it sound like an endearment. "What matters to the crystals is not how we came to be in the trial, but what we truly intend now that we are here." I looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since this wild situation began. Beyond the alien features, beyond the political power she represented, I saw someone who was taking a chance on me, on us, for reasons I was only beginning to understand. "And what do you intend, Matriarch Kira?" I asked quietly. Her tail moved in that same, slow, deliberate pattern I couldn't interpret. "That," she said, "is what tomorrow will reveal." She left soon after, leaving me with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that the next day's ceremony would change everything, one way or another. That night, I dreamed of crystalline gardens where light spoke truth that words could not express, and of a magnificent tale that danced with meanings I was learning, slowly, to understand. The chamber of harmonic resonance was unlike any room I had yet seen on Zenthar Prime. Circular, like many Zenthari spaces. It was lined entirely with what appeared to be raw crystal formations that caught and refracted light in hypnotic patterns. The floor was a perfect mirror, creating the illusion that we stood suspended between two identical crystal-studded spheres. At the center of the chamber, a raised platform held what could only be the harmony crystals, a cluster of translucent formations that seemed to pulse with inner light, even in their dormant state. The Alliance Council members sat in a semicircle facing the platform, their varied anatomies accommodated by specially designed seating. Councillor Thurk and the Tyreek block representatives occupied the most prominent positions, their eye stalks quivering with what I interpreted as anticipation. Kira and I stood at the entrance, waiting to be summoned forward. She was dressed in ceremonial robes of deep purple and silver, her tail adorned with tiny crystalline ornaments that caught the light with every movement. I had been clothed in complementary garments of similar colors, though without the elaborate tail decorations, obviously. "Remember," she said quietly, "the crystals respond to genuine intention, not to rehearsed words. Speak from your heart, not from political calculation." "That's what I'm afraid of," I muttered. Before she could respond, a resonant tone filled the chamber, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. "Matriarch Kira of the Zenthari Dominion and Consort Designate Joshua Rays of Earth," announced a voice that seemed to come from the crystals themselves. "Approach the Harmony Center for the rite of mutual intention." We walked forward together, our reflections moving in perfect sync below us. As we stepped onto the platform, the harmony crystals began to glow more intensely, their light pulsing in a rhythm that somehow matched my heartbeat. "The rite of mutual intention has been invoked," continued the voice. "The participants will now express their true intentions toward one another, and the crystals will resonate with their authenticity." Councillor Thurk rose from their seat. "As the petitioner for this rite, I ask that the humans speak first," they said, their gravelly voice echoing in the crystalline chamber. "Let us hear what intentions truly brought him to initiate the trial union with our matriarch." There was a murmur of agreement from the council members. Kira's tail moved in a small pattern of reassurance, and she stepped back slightly, leaving me alone at the center of the platform. I looked out at the assembled representatives of a dozen worlds, then back at the pulsing harmony crystals, and finally at Kira, who watched me with those inscrutable faceted eyes. What were my true intentions? The question echoed in my mind, more complex than it had seemed even hours ago. When this began, My only intention had been to fix a comms relay and return to my comfortable anonymity. Then, when the misunderstanding occurred, my intention had been simply to endure the 7 days and escape without causing diplomatic incident. But now, after days at Kira's side, witnessing her intelligence, her grace under pressure, her subtle kindness, my intentions had become far more complicated. "I am Joshua Reyes," I began, my voice stronger than I expected. "Communications technician from Earth Colony 7, 4 days ago." I said 3 words that changed my life. Nice tale. I didn't know then that those words would initiate a trial union with matriarch Kira. The harmony. Crystals pulsed in sync with my words, their light neither dimming nor brightening, simply acknowledging the truth of my statement. "I won't pretend that I intended to propose marriage," I continued. "On Earth, complimenting someone's appearance is just a compliment, not a proposal. So yes, there was a cultural misunderstanding." At this, Counselor Thurk's eye stalks quivered triumphantly, and I could hear murmurs spreading through the council. But the crystals continued their steady pulsing, neither confirming nor denying the significance of my admission. "But intentions can change," I said, finding my rhythm now. "In just 4 days, I've seen more of the galaxy, of politics, of diplomacy than I ever thought possible. I've witnessed matriarch Kira's intelligence, her patience, her skillful navigation of challenges I can barely comprehend." The crystal's light intensified slightly, encouraging me to continue. "I've seen how she values truth over convenience, integrity over advantage. I've watched her defend not just her own people, but the rights of newer species like mine to have a voice in the Alliance." The light grew brighter still, and I could feel a warmth emanating from the crystals, as if they were responding to the emotion in my words. "So, while I can't claim that I intended this trial from the beginning, I can tell you my intentions now, with complete honesty." I turned to face Kira directly, no longer speaking to the council but to her alone. "My intention is to stand beside you for these 7 days, and any days beyond that you might wish, offering whatever insight or perspective I can, not as a political calculation, not as a strategic advantage, but because I have come to admire and care for you in ways I never expected." The harmony crystals erupted in brilliant light, casting rainbow reflections across the mirrored floor and crystal walls. A harmonious tone filled the chamber, so beautiful it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. There was a collective gasp from the council members, and even Counselor Thurk's eye stalks went rigid with apparent shock. I stepped back, both exhilarated and terrified by what had just happened. Had I said too much? Not enough? Would Kira be angry at my presumption? But as she moved forward to take my place at the center of the platform, her tail brushed against my hand in a gesture that felt unmistakably like gratitude. "I am Matriarch Kira of the Zenthari Dominion," she began, her melodic voice filling the chamber. "Leader of my people and representative to the Galactic Alliance. When Joshua Reyes spoke his unintended proposal, I recognized the cultural misunderstanding immediately. The crystals pulsed in acknowledgement of this truth, and I saw Counselor Thurk lean forward intently. "I could have dismissed it as such," she continued. "Protocol would have permitted an immediate clarification, but I chose to accept the trial." Her tail moved in that deliberate pattern I had seen the night before, a pattern I now realized was associated with particularly personal revelations. "I made this choice not for political advantage, as some have suggested," she said, with a pointed glance toward the Tyreek bloc representatives. "Nor was it merely to uphold tradition, though our traditions are sacred to me." The crystal's light began to intensify as she spoke, responding to the authenticity in her words. "I accepted the trial because, in that moment of unexpected connection, I saw an opportunity to learn from someone unlike any of the diplomatic representatives who usually surround me. Someone who might see patterns that others miss, who might speak truths that protocol would silence. She turned to face me now, just as I had faced her. My intention was to discover whether a human technician with no political ambitions might bring value to my life and work simply by being himself, observant, principled, unbound by diplomatic pretense. The crystal's glow had become so bright that it cast her silhouette in sharp relief against their radiance. "What I have discovered in these 4 days has exceeded my expectations," she said, her voice softening. "Joshua Reyes has shown insight where experts saw only data, courage where diplomats counseled caution, and integrity where politicians calculated advantage." The harmonious tone that had accompanied my declaration returned, stronger now, resonating through the crystal chamber in waves that seemed to touch something deep within me. "So my intention now," she concluded, "is to complete this trial union with an open heart and mind, allowing it to guide us both to whatever future best serves not only our peoples, but our own unexpected connection." The harmony crystals exploded in radiance, their light so intense that many council members shielded their eyes or sensory appendages. The harmonic tone reached a crescendo that vibrated through my entire body, leaving me breathless with its beauty. And then, gradually, both light and sound subsided to a gentle glow and hum, leaving the chamber in a state of awed silence. The voice that had announced the ceremony spoke again, though it seemed somehow warmer than before. "The rite of mutual intention has been fulfilled. The harmony crystals have confirmed the authenticity of both declarations. The trial union stands validated before the Alliance Council." Councillor Thurk rose abruptly, their eye stalks rigid with what could only be anger. "This outcome is unexpected," they said stiffly. "The Council will need to deliberate on its implications." "The right of mutual intention is not subject to deliberation, Councillor," replied Kira smoothly. "It is absolute in its judgment, as you well know. The trial union continues with the full recognition of the Alliance." With that, she extended her hand to me, and together we descended from the platform and exited the chamber, leaving the Council to absorb what had just transpired. It wasn't until we were alone in the gravity tube that I finally found my voice again. "That was intense," I said, a significant understatement. "The rite of mutual intention is our most sacred truth-revealing ceremony," she replied. "Few experience such strong resonance from the crystals." "Does that mean what we said, it was really true? Both of us?" Her tail moved in a pattern I now recognized as affirmation. "The crystals do not resonate with diplomatic platitudes or convenient half-truths," she said. "They respond only to genuine intention and emotion. So when you said you wanted to continue the trial with an open heart and mind—" "I meant exactly that," she said, those faceted eyes somehow softer than I'd ever seen them. "As did you when you spoke of standing beside me for these 7 days and beyond." We rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before, charged not with tension or uncertainty, but with possibilities neither of us had anticipated when this journey began. The political implications of the ceremony would unfold in the days to come. But in that moment, all I could think about was how the harmony crystals had confirmed what I had only just begun to acknowledge to myself, that somewhere between Nicetail and now, I had developed genuine feelings for the matriarch of the Zinthari Dominion. And miraculously, it seemed she might feel something similar for me. The 5th and 6th days of our trial union passed in a whirlwind of diplomatic functions and private moments that took on new meaning after the rite of mutual intention ceremony. The Tyreek bloc had retreated into sullen acquiescence, their challenge to our union thoroughly defeated by the crystal's overwhelming validation. Kira and I developed a new rhythm together, our public partnership now infused with the private knowledge that our connection went beyond political expediency or cultural misunderstanding. She began to teach me the subtle language of tail movements, while I introduced her to the human concept of humor that didn't require formal protocols. We attended alliance negotiations together, where my pattern recognition skills continued to prove useful in unexpected ways. I caught data discrepancies in trade proposals that even Kira's experienced advisors had missed, and my outsider perspective helped break deadlocks in discussions that had been ongoing for months. In the evening of the 6th day, Kira brought me to what she called the Harmony Garden, a quiet space at the heart of her private quarters, where plants from dozens of worlds grew together in carefully tended harmony. "Few outsiders are permitted here," she said, as we walked among flowering vines that seemed to reach toward us as we passed. "It is a place for reflection and important decisions." "It's beautiful," I said, meaning it. After days surrounded by the crystalline architecture and formal spaces of Zenthar Prime, the organic chaos of the garden felt like a breath of fresh air. We came to a small clearing where a bench formed from living wood offered a view of the entire garden. Kira gestured for me to sit beside her. "Tomorrow is the 7th day," she said after a moment of comfortable silence. "The end of the trial," I acknowledged, feeling a surprising pang at the thought. "Traditionally, this is when both participants decide whether to formalize the union or file for dissolution," she explained, her tale moving in slow, thoughtful patterns. "There would be a ceremony either way, either a binding ritual or a formal separation." "What happens if we don't choose either?" I asked cautiously. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we're not ready to decide? What if we want more time?" Her tale stilled. "The trial is specifically designed to last 7 days," she said. "It has been thus for millennia. But surely there must be some provision for, I don't know, an extension? More assessment time?" A series of tiny illuminations rippled along her tale, that Zenthari smile I had come to recognize and cherish. "There is no formal extension protocol," she said, "but there is also no requirement to immediately file the dissolution. If neither party submits the formal request, the trial status simply continues. So we could just not file anything? Keep going as we are?" "Technically, yes," she admitted. "Though it would be highly unusual. The purpose of the trial is to reach a decision." I turned to face her more directly. "Kira, a week ago I was a communications technician whose biggest concern was fixing relay stations without attracting attention. Now I'm, whatever this is, consort designate, diplomatic partner. It's a lot to process in 7 days." "You have adapted remarkably well," she said, and I could hear genuine admiration in her voice. "Only because you've guided me," I replied. "But I'm still learning about your world, your customs, your politics, and about us, whatever us might be." Her tale moved in that deliberate pattern I now recognized as her way of signaling deep personal consideration. "You wish to continue the trial beyond the traditional period," she said, making it a statement rather than a question. "I wish to continue exploring what we might be to each other," I clarified, "without artificial deadlines or ceremonial pressures." "That is not how things are usually done among the Zenthari," she said, though her tone held curiosity rather than rejection. "I'm not Zenthari," I reminded her with a smile. "One of my apparent values is bringing a different perspective, remember?" Those illuminations rippled along her tale again. "Indeed," she acknowledged. "Your approach has merit. A continued assessment period would allow for more data collection before a final determination." I laughed softly. "That's one way of putting it. I'd say it gives us time to figure out if what the Harmony crystals confirmed is something we want to build on." "The crystals confirmed authentic intention and emotion," she said, her voice softening. "They did not dictate the path forward." "Exactly," I agreed. "So maybe we don't need to rush that path." She was silent for a moment, her tale moving in contemplative patterns. "The Alliance Council will expect a formal announcement tomorrow," she said finally. either of binding or dissolution. Then let's give them an announcement, I suggested. Just not the one they're expecting. Kira tilted her head in that way she had when I'd proposed something she found intriguing but unconventional. What do you suggest? Let's announce that we're continuing the assessment, that we've found value in our partnership and wish to explore it further without arbitrary time constraints. It would cause quite a stir, she said, though I could tell the idea appealed to her, particularly among the more traditional factions. Good, I said with a grin. Keep them off balance. Isn't that a valuable diplomatic strategy? It is indeed, she agreed, those faceted eyes reflecting the soft lights of the garden. Very well, Joshua Rays. Tomorrow we shall announce our intention to continue the trial beyond its traditional boundaries. Breaking new ground in interspecies relations, I said, only half joking. A fitting role for us both, she replied. And then, in a gesture I hadn't expected, she extended her hand to clasp mine. The touch of her scaled skin against my own sent a pleasant shiver up my arm. We sat in the Harmony Garden until late in the night, talking of small things and large, of Earth and Zenthar Prime, of communications relays and galactic politics. And if, when we finally parted at the door to my chambers, her tail brushed against mine in what I was learning was a gesture of special intimacy among her people, well, that was just one more discovery in a week full of unexpected revelations. The seventh day dawned with a tension that permeated Zenthar Prime. Word had somehow spread that today marked the end of the unusual trial union between the matriarch and the human technician, and speculation ran rampant about the outcome. Would there be a formal binding ceremony, elevating a human to unprecedented status in the Zenthari hierarchy? Or would there be a dissolution, confirming what many had suspected from the beginning, that this had all been some strange diplomatic ploy? The attendants who came to prepare me for the day were practically vibrating with suppressed curiosity, though Zenthari protocol prevented them from asking direct questions. The ceremonial chamber has been prepared according to tradition, said one, carefully neutral. Both binding and dissolution vestments have been made available, added another, watching closely for my reaction. I maintained what I hoped was an inscrutable expression, having learned at least a little diplomatic poise in the past week. Thank you, I said simply. I will dress when the matriarch indicates it is time. This non-answer clearly frustrated them, but they withdrew with impeccable politeness. Nexon arrived as I was finishing breakfast, their tail moving in agitated patterns that betrayed their own curiosity. The Alliance Council has convened for the seventh-day declaration, they informed me. Representatives from all member species are present. The Tyreek bloc has positioned themselves prominently, clearly expecting a dissolution announcement. And what are you expecting, Nexon? I asked, genuinely curious about their perspective. Their tail stilled. It is not my place to have expectations, consort designate. But you have observations, I persisted. You've seen us together these past days. What have you observed? Nexon hesitated, then replied with unexpected candor. I have observed a compatibility that transcends cultural differences, a synergy that benefits not only you both personally, but the Alliance as a whole. And would you support a continuation of that synergy? Support? They seemed startled by the question. My role is to advise and implement, not to support or oppose the matriarch's decisions. But if you were asked for your advice, Nexon's tail moved in a pattern I hadn't seen before, something complex and nuanced. If asked directly, I would advise that valuable partnerships should not be discarded due to mere tradition or political expectation. I smiled, recognizing this as perhaps the strongest endorsement I could expect from the proper diplomatic advisor. Thank you, Nexon. I value your perspective. The matriarch awaits you in the preparation chamber, they said, clearly ready to change the subject. The ceremony begins in one standard hour. The preparation chamber, turned out to be a small, intimate space adjoining the larger ceremonial hall where the Alliance Council was gathering. Kira was already there when I arrived, dressed not in either the binding or dissolution vestments, but in her formal diplomatic attire. "You've chosen neither ceremonial outfit," I observed, relieved to see that she was following through with our plan. "As we are choosing neither traditional path, it seemed appropriate," she replied, her tail moving in what I now recognized as a pattern of amused defiance. "The council won't know what hit them," I said with a grin. "Indeed," she agreed, particularly Councillor Thurk, who has been quite vocal about expecting a dissolution announcement. "Let them speculate," I said. "It keeps diplomacy interesting." Her tail flicked in that way that signaled her version of laughter. "You have brought many things to my life in these 7 days," Joshua Rays. "But interesting, perhaps most of all." The formal attendant appeared at the door. "Matriarch, consort designate, the council awaits your declaration." Kira extended her hand to me, and I took it without hesitation. Together, we walked into the ceremonial hall, where representatives from across the galaxy sat in tiered seating around a central platform. The harmony crystals had been moved here from their usual chamber, their gentle glow illuminating the space with shifting patterns of light. Matriarch Kira of the Zenthari Dominion and Consort Designate Joshua Rays of Earth approach for the 7th-day declaration, announced the ceremonial voice. We ascended to the platform, still hand in hand, facing the assembled council with what I hoped was appropriate dignity. Councillor Thurk sat in the front row, their eye stalks quivering with what I had learned to recognize as anticipation. Beside them were other representatives of the Tyreek bloc, all watching with similar intensity. "On this 7th day of the trial union," continued the ceremonial voice, "the participants will declare their intention to either bind or dissolve their temporary connection. Matriarch Kira, as the senior participant, you may speak first." Kira stepped forward, her tail moving in slow, graceful patterns that conveyed confidence and conviction to those who could read them. "Esteemed members of the Alliance Council," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "For millennia, the 7th-day declaration has followed a binary path, binding or dissolution. Today, we stand before you to propose a third option." A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembly. Councillor Thurk's eye stalks went rigid with apparent shock. "The trial union between myself and Joshua Rays began unexpectedly," Kira continued. "A cultural misunderstanding that might have been dismissed, but instead opened a door to new possibilities. In these 7 days, our partnership has proven valuable, not only to us personally, but to the diplomatic work of the Alliance." The harmony crystals pulsed gently, affirming the truth of her words. "The right of mutual intention has already confirmed the authenticity of our connection," she said. "Yet, 7 days is an arbitrary time frame for evaluating a relationship that crosses species boundaries and challenges traditional expectations." She turned slightly toward me, her tail moving in that deliberate pattern of personal revelation. "Therefore, we declare our intention to continue the trial union beyond the traditional period, neither binding nor dissolving, but exploring the potential of our connection without artificial constraints." The murmur in the hall grew louder, delegates turning to one another in evident surprise and confusion. Councillor Thurk half rose from their seat, eye stalks quivering violently, but protocol prevented them from interrupting the declaration. "This continuation honors both the spirit of the trial, authentic assessment of compatibility, and the evolving nature of alliance relationships," Kira concluded. "It represents not an avoidance of decision, but a commitment to thorough evaluation." She stepped back, and I moved forward to take her place, suddenly aware of hundreds of alien eyes fixed on me. "Members of the council," I began, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. 7 days ago, I knew almost nothing about Zenthari customs, alliance politics, or diplomatic protocols. I was just a communications technician who accidentally said the right or wrong thing at the right time. The crystals pulsed, acknowledging my honesty, and I saw a few amused reactions among the delegates. Since then, I've learned more than I thought possible about the Zenthari, about the Alliance, and about myself. I continued. I've discovered capabilities I didn't know I had, and connections I never expected to make. I glanced at Kira, drawing strength from her presence. The matriarch has shown remarkable patience with my cultural missteps and surprising openness to my unconventional perspectives. Our partnership has proven valuable in ways neither of us anticipated. The crystal's glow intensified, bathing the platform in gentle light. But 7 days is not enough to fully explore what this connection might become, I said. Not enough to understand how an unconventional partnership might benefit both our peoples and the Alliance as a whole. So we ask, not for binding, not for dissolution, but for time. Time to discover what might grow from this unexpected beginning. As I finished speaking, the harmony crystals erupted in that now familiar radiance, casting rainbow reflections throughout the hall and filling the space with harmonious tones that seemed to touch something deep within everyone present. When the light and sound subsided, there was a moment of profound silence before the ceremonial voice spoke again. The declaration has been made and affirmed by the harmony crystals. It announced, the trial union between Matriarch Kira of the Zenthari Dominion and Consort Designate Joshua Rays of Earth shall continue beyond traditional boundaries, creating a new precedent in Alliance records. Counselor Thurk finally rose fully, eye stalks rigid with what could only be anger. This is unprecedented, they protested. The trial must end on the 7th day with either binding or dissolution. It is our most sacred tradition. Traditions evolve, Counselor, replied Kira calmly. The harmony crystals have affirmed our declaration. Would you question their judgment? It was a masterful counter. The Tyreek bloc had been the ones to demand the right of mutual intention, putting their faith in the crystal's ability to reveal truth. They could hardly now dismiss the crystal's clear affirmation of our continued union.